The rain had not stopped all morning. It fell in a ceaseless, drumming pattern on the roof of the church, drowning out the muffled sniffles of those gathered inside. The scent of lilies, my mother's favorite flowers, filled the air, but instead of bringing comfort, it only deepened the suffocating grief pressing against my chest. I stood near the front, barely able to process the eulogy being read by the priest. My mother, the woman who had always been my anchor, was gone. The reality of it settled like a lead weight in my stomach. I clasped my hands together, swallowing back the emotions threatening to spill over. Fiona, my older sister, or at least the woman I had always called my sister, sat a few rows behind me, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. Next to her was her husband, Mark. I had never liked him, and the feeling was mutual. He had a way of looking at people as if they were chess pieces, things to be moved and manipulated for his own benefit. The ceremony ended, and we all moved to the reception hall attached to the church. People murmured their condolences, offering empty words that blurred together in my ears. I just nodded along, thanking them automatically. But before I could slip away for a moment of solitude, Mark clapped his hands loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Well," he announced, straightening his tie with an air of self-importance, "this is as good a time as any to discuss my mother-in-law's estate." A hush fell over the room. I felt my jaw tighten, but Mark continued as if he were the most important person in the world. "As the husband of Fiona, the eldest daughter, I believe it's time to address the distribution of assets. We all know there's the matter of the stocks and, of course, the $4 million inheritance." I blinked, stunned at his audacity. My mother had just been laid to rest, and here he was, already scrambling to get his hands on her money. Mark squared his shoulders, speaking with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. "Naturally, as the oldest, Fiona will be the rightful recipient of the bulk of the estate." For a second, there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, the lawyer, who had been standing discreetly in the corner, let out a dry, amused chuckle. The sound caught me off guard, but I couldn't stop the laughter that followed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep within me, shaking free from the grief that had held me in a chokehold all day. Mark's face darkened. "Something funny?" he snapped. I wiped the corner of my eye, my laughter subsiding into a smirk. "Yeah, actually, it is funny." The lawyer cleared his throat, stepping forward. He was an older man with a calm, measured demeanor, the kind of person who didn't react to nonsense. "Mr. Mark, I'm afraid there's a slight complication with your claim," he said, his tone neutral but firm. Mark scoffed. "What complication?" "Fiona is the eldest daughter." "That's where you're wrong," the lawyer replied smoothly. He adjusted his glasses and glanced at Fiona, whose expression shifted from smug assurance to uncertainty. I folded my arms, watching Mark's confidence begin to crumble. The lawyer continued, his voice steady. "Fiona is not the biological daughter of the deceased." The room went completely still. Fiona stiffened. "What? That's ridiculous. I grew up in this family. I was raised by Mom." The lawyer remained unmoved. "That may be true, but legally, she was never adopted. And since the estate follows legal lineage, Fiona has no claim to the inheritance." Mark's face paled, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process the information. He turned to Fiona, eyes narrowing. "Tell me this is a joke." Fiona's hands clenched at her sides. I never knew." Her voice cracked as she turned to stare at the empty chair that had once been our mother's spot, as if expecting an answer, as if she could will the dead to rise and tell her this was all some cruel misunderstanding. But silence was the only response she got. I exhaled, shaking my head. It was surreal to see the truth finally laid out like this. I had known for years. Our father had confided in me when I was a teenager. But Fiona had been treated no differently than a real daughter, and Mom had loved her regardless. That, however, didn't change the facts. Mark's eyes darted between us, his mind already spinning for a way out of this mess. This is some kind of trick," he stammered. "There must be a way around it." The lawyer remained composed. "The will is very clear. The inheritance and assets follow direct bloodlines, unless a legal adoption has taken place. Fiona was never formally adopted. There is no claim." Fiona turned sharply, her eyes burning into me. "You knew, didn't you?" Her voice was laced with betrayal. I met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I did." Her breath hitched. "And you didn't think to tell me?" I clenched my jaw. It wasn't my place to. That was Mom's decision. You should be angry at her, not me. Her expression twisted, a mixture of heartbreak and fury warring within her. I could see the fight in her, the need to cling to what she thought was hers. But deep down, she knew the truth couldn't be changed. Mark, however, wasn't ready to accept defeat. He took a step forward, his voice rising in desperation. There must be something we can do. Fiona was treated as a daughter. That should count for something. The lawyer sighed, his patience thinning. Legally, it doesn't. Mark turned to Fiona, his jaw clenched. I saw something shift in his eyes, something ugly and accusatory. He wasn't just disappointed, he was furious. You told me we were rich, he hissed, his voice low but sharp. Fiona's face lost what little color it had left. Mark, I didn't know. You said this money was ours. You lied to me. His voice cracked like a whip through the room. A few guests awkwardly shifted, some whispering amongst themselves, clearly realizing that the situation had turned from uncomfortable to outright disastrous. Then, without another word, Mark turned on his heel and stormed out. Fiona stood there, frozen. For the first time in her life, she looked truly alone. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. Maybe to me, maybe to herself. But then, just like Mark, she turned away. The lawyer adjusted his glasses once more. Well, he said quietly, that was quite the revelation. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything settle onto my shoulders. The funeral had already been a difficult day, but now, things were about to get much worse. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Fiona stood frozen in place, staring at the empty chair where our mother had once sat. Her face, usually so composed and sharp, was pale and unreadable. I could see the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides, her breath uneven as the weight of the revelation crashed down on her. She had no legal claim, no right to the inheritance. Fiona had always walked through life with an air of entitlement, believing she was untouchable. And now, in front of all these people, the foundation of her entire identity had been shaken. She slowly turned toward me, her eyes burning with accusation. You knew? Her voice was quiet but sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. I met her gaze without flinching. Yes, I knew. A gasp came from someone in the crowd, but I ignored it. This wasn't about them. This was about Fiona, about the truth, and about what our mother had never found the courage to tell her. You knew, she repeated, her voice rising. Her face contorted in rage, her hands trembling as if she was trying to hold herself together. And you didn't think to tell me? I exhaled, keeping my voice even. It wasn't my place to tell you. Fiona let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Not your place? You let me believe I was part of this family all my life, and you didn't think I deserved to know the truth. The lawyer, standing beside me, cleared his throat. Your mother never legally adopted you, Fiona. That's the reality. This isn't about emotions, it's about the law. Fiona's head snapped toward him. The law, she sneered. The law doesn't change the fact that I was raised in this family, that I was her daughter. The lawyer didn't waver. And I'm not disputing that. But legally, the will is clear. Her lips parted, and for the first time in a long time, she looked lost. Truly lost. Like a child standing in the middle of a storm, unsure of which direction to run. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then, her gaze landed on me again, and all the sorrow was replaced with something venomous. This is your fault, she hissed, stepping closer. You and your smug little smirk. You knew this would happen, didn't you? I sighed, shaking my head. Fiona, this isn't some conspiracy against you. This is reality. You're not entitled to the inheritance. Her nostrils flared. Entitled? Entitled? I was raised in this house just like you. Mom loved me just as much as she loved you. I didn't respond. What was the point? She wasn't listening. Fiona whirled around, looking for someone, anyone, to back her up. But the room had gone eerily silent. The guests, once murmuring in hushed whispers, were now shifting uncomfortably, pretending not to watch. Even Mark, who had been so loudly proclaiming his wife's inheritance, had vanished from the room. She was alone. I can fight this, she muttered to herself, her voice shaking. I'll take this to court. The lawyer, ever composed, adjusted his tie. You are, of course, free to seek legal counsel. But I assure you, the will is airtight. Fiona's eyes darted between him and me, her desperation growing. This isn't fair, she whispered. I tilted my head. Maybe not. But it's the truth. She flinched like I had slapped her. For the first time, I saw something in her break. A crack in her perfect exterior. The realization that no matter how much she yelled, no matter how much she fought, there was nothing she could do. Mom wouldn't do this to me, she whispered. She wouldn't leave me with nothing. I sighed. Fiona, maybe she didn't think it would come to this. Maybe she thought we'd work it out as a family. Her lips trembled, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But then, just as quickly as the vulnerability appeared, she buried it under her fury. This isn't over, she spat before turning on her heel and storming toward the exit. I watched her go, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. The lawyer sighed beside me. That could have gone worse. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. Could it? The lawyer gave me a knowing look. She'll come back. I nodded. I knew that too. Because Fiona never knew when to quit. And something told me she wasn't going to walk away from this without a fight. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Even after Fiona stormed out, a heavy silence lingered, thick with unsaid words and unresolved tension. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me like a cold fog. The lawyer was already gathering his papers, murmuring quiet words to himself as he double-checked his documents. The guests, still awkwardly shifting in place, avoided my gaze. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. This was supposed to be a day of mourning, a day to remember our mother, not a battlefield over inheritance. But Mark had made sure to turn it into something ugly, something irreversibly tainted. Speaking of Mark, I stepped out of the reception hall and into the dimly lit hallway, my eyes scanning for him. I knew he hadn't left yet. The man was greedy, yes, but he was also calculating. He wouldn't just walk away without trying to find another angle. And sure enough, as I turned the corner toward the back exit, I found him standing there, hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face a dark shade of red. Fiona stood opposite him, shoulders squared, eyes wide with disbelief. You lied to me. Mark's voice was sharp and filled with unrestrained fury. Fiona recoiled as if he had slapped her. What are you talking about? You told me we were rich, he hissed, stepping forward. You told me your mother left you a fortune. That's the entire reason I put up with you. He cut himself off, shaking his head violently, his lips pressing into a thin line. Fiona's expression flickered with something dangerous. Excuse me. I leaned against the wall, deciding to watch for now. Mark scoffed. Don't act so surprised. You always made it sound like you were set for life. I thought marrying you meant financial security. And now I find out you're nothing. Fiona's hands curled into fists. You were using me? Mark let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, don't act like you're some innocent victim. You played the same game. You let me believe we'd be living in luxury, that all I had to do was wait for your mother to pass, and then we'd be set. You let me believe we had millions coming to us. Fiona's face twisted in horror. I never lied to you. I thought. You thought what? Mark cut in. That you could just claim something that was never yours? Her silence was answer enough. Mark scoffed again, running a hand through his slick back hair. He turned away, muttering curses under his breath. Fiona took a step forward. Mark, wait. We can figure something out. Mark turned back sharply. Figure what out? You heard the lawyer. You have no claim. No money. No stocks. Nothing. Fiona swallowed, her eyes darting toward me for the briefest of moments. I could see it then, the desperation creeping in, the realization that she had lost everything, not just the inheritance, but the life she thought she had built. Mark followed her gaze and let out a bitter chuckle. Oh, I see how it is. You're hoping your dear brother here will fix this for you. I pushed off the wall, deciding it was time to intervene. Don't drag me into your mess, I said evenly. Mark's glare shifted to me, his nostrils flaring. This is your fault. If you had just agreed to split the inheritance. I laughed dryly. You really think I owe you anything? Mark stepped closer, his expression darkening. You think this is funny? I held his gaze, unbothered by the threat in his tone. I think it's pathetic. Fiona's breath hitched beside him. She looked between us, her face drawn, exhausted. Mark, please, she murmured. We can find another way. Mark's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He inhaled deeply, exhaled through his nose, and then, without another word, turned on his heel and stormed out the exit. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in the narrow hallway. Fiona stood frozen, staring at the closed door as if she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Then, slowly, her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. For the first time, I saw it, the truth settling in her eyes. She had lost everything. She turned to me, and I braced myself for another outburst, another accusation, but what I saw in her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was something quieter, something emptier. You really think Mom did this on purpose? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed. I think Mom made the decision she thought was right. Fiona scoffed, shaking her head. Right, she muttered. Right. She turned away, rubbing at her temples. This doesn't make sense. I was her daughter in every way that mattered. I didn't argue. She let out a bitter laugh. But I guess none of that matters now, does it? I hesitated before speaking. Fiona. She held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. I let her go. I watched as she straightened her shoulders and walked away, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. As the door shut behind her, I felt something else settle in my chest, an unease that told me this wasn't over. Fiona wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat quietly. And something told me that whatever she did next, it wouldn't be good. The lawyer sat at the head of the long oak table, the weight of the will in his hands. I could see the confidence in his demeanor, the quiet authority that came from years of handling these situations. He had dealt with countless families tearing each other apart over inheritances, and this was just another day at the office for him. But for me, it was anything but routine. Fiona sat across from me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her nails digging into the fabric of her dress. She hadn't spoken a word since Mark's dramatic exit. Instead, she glared at me with a silent fury that burned hotter than anything she could have said aloud. The lawyer cleared his throat. Now that the initial disputes have been raised, let's go through the official reading of the will. He placed the documents on the table and carefully unfolded them. The crisp sound of paper shifting filled the silent room, and I could feel Fiona tense beside me. As per the wishes of the deceased, the estate, stocks, and financial assets are to be distributed as follows, he began, his voice steady. All assets, including the $4 million inheritance, the family home, and remaining financial holdings, are to be transferred solely to her biological son. A single breath. That was all it took for Fiona to explode. What? She shrieked, the chair scraping against the floor as she shot to her feet. The lawyer didn't even flinch. He had likely expected this. He calmly adjusted his glasses and continued reading. Our client, the late Mrs. Whitmore, made this decision based on a multitude of factors, including financial responsibility and long-term stability. The will has been legally verified and signed, with all necessary documentation in place. Fiona's face turned red with fury. This is a joke. This has to be a joke. I exhaled, already tired of her theatrics. Fiona, sit down. She whirled on me. You knew about this, didn't you? I met her gaze evenly. I had no idea what Mom's final decision was. But I knew she wanted us to talk about this before she passed. You refused. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Because she knew I was right. The lawyer continued, flipping through another document. In addition to the monetary assets, the late Mrs. Whitmore expressed explicit concerns about Fiona's financial history. There are multiple records of reckless spending, debts, and unpaid loans in her name. Based on these factors, she was not included in the final inheritance. Fiona's face contorted in rage. So she just disowned me? Just like that. The lawyer remained composed. Not at all. Your mother ensured you were well cared for during her lifetime. She provided financial support, covered numerous debts, and even offered to help you establish a savings plan. He glanced at another document before adding, You rejected every offer. Fiona's breath hitched. For the first time, her anger wavered. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Fiona, you know this is true. You never took responsibility for anything. Mom covered for you for years. She bailed you out every time you made a mistake, and you never appreciated it. Her hands clenched into fists. That doesn't mean she had to cut me off completely. The lawyer sighed. This was not a decision made lightly. Your mother revised this will multiple times over the years. The final version was signed 6 months before her passing. Fiona's eyes darkened. You mean after you got in her ear? After you convinced her that I wasn't worthy? I shook my head, exhausted by her accusations. I didn't have to convince her of anything. She made her own decisions. Fiona slammed a hand on the table. This isn't fair. The lawyer simply closed the folder. Fair or not, it is legally binding. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could hear Fiona's breathing, sharp and uneven, as she struggled to process everything. She had lost, and she knew it. But I also knew Fiona. She wasn't the type to accept defeat. She turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You could fix this, she said, her voice quieter now. I frowned. What? You could change this, she pressed, stepping closer. You don't have to keep all of it. You could give me my share. I felt my jaw tighten. It's not your share, Fiona. It was never yours to begin with. Her face crumpled. I was part of this family. I deserve something. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Mom made her choice. And honestly, I don't think she was wrong. Her breath hitched. You really believe that? I hesitated before nodding. Yeah, I do. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But then, just as quickly, the vulnerability vanished, replaced by that all-too-familiar rage. Her eyes narrowed. Fine, she spat. If you want to be Mom's perfect little boy, go ahead. But don't think this is over. I felt a chill run down my spine. The lawyer cleared his throat. If there are no further questions, we can conclude the reading of the will. Fiona didn't respond. She turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. As the door slammed behind her, I let out a slow breath. I had a feeling I hadn't seen the last of her anger. 6 months had passed since that disastrous reading of the will, and while I'd done my best to move on, I knew Fiona wouldn't let it go so easily. The last time we spoke, she had made it clear this wasn't over. And though she hadn't contacted me since, I could feel her resentment lingering in the air, like an unseen force waiting for the right moment to strike. Still, I had my own life to focus on. I had spent the past few months sorting out the estate, making the necessary arrangements, and trying to settle back into a sense of normalcy. The family home, though legally mine, still carried the weight of the past. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Part of me considered selling, but another part couldn't bear the thought of letting it go. That was why I found myself there again on that fateful afternoon. The house stood just as it always had, a grand but aging structure that had seen generations of our family pass through its doors. The air was crisp with the early chill of autumn, leaves crunching beneath my shoes as I walked up the driveway. I had only planned to stay for a short while, to check on things, to decide what my next move would be. I never expected to almost die. It happened so fast. The sound of an engine revving caught my attention, but before I could react, headlights flooded my vision. A car was speeding straight toward me. Time slowed. For a split second, all I could do was stare, my mind struggling to process what was happening. But then instinct kicked in, and I threw myself to the side, my body colliding with the damp earth of the garden bed just as the car swerved at the last moment, barely missing me. I gasped, my pulse pounding in my ears. The scent of crushed flowers filled my nostrils, mingling with the acrid stench of burnt rubber as the car screeched to a stop a few yards away. My heart was hammering against my ribs, my body still locked in the grip of adrenaline. Slowly, I pushed myself up, my muscles aching from the impact. My mind raced. That hadn't been an accident. The driver had aimed for me. And then the car door swung open. Mark stepped out. A rush of cold fury surged through me as I locked eyes with him. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glint of something dangerous in his gaze, something unhinged. He took a step closer, his hands clenched into fists. Well, would you look at that? You're tougher than I thought. I forced myself to my feet, my breath still uneven. What the hell was that? I demanded. Mark smirked, his posture casual, as if he hadn't just tried to run me down. Relax. It was an accident. I let out a sharp laugh. An accident? You nearly killed me. He shrugged. I misjudged the turn. Could happen to anyone. I took a step toward him, my fist tightening. Cut the crap, Mark. We both know that wasn't an accident. His smirk didn't falter. Oh? And what exactly are you accusing me of? I could feel the rage bubbling beneath my skin, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't help. Instead, I studied him. He looked disheveled, his clothes slightly wrinkled, his hair unkempt. There was an edge of desperation clinging to him, barely concealed beneath his usual arrogance. You're pathetic, I said, my voice even. You lost. Get over it. The smirk disappeared. His jaw clenched. You don't get it, do you? I crossed my arms. Oh, I get it just fine. You married Fiona thinking you'd struck gold. And now, you're scrambling because there's nothing left for you to take. Mark's eyes darkened. She deserves that money. I let out a humorless laugh. Fiona deserves nothing. And neither do you. His hands twitched at his sides, his fingers curling and uncurling as if he were restraining himself from doing something reckless. She was part of that family. I shook my head. Legally, she wasn't. And deep down, you know that. You just don't care. Mark took another step closer, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. You think you're untouchable, don't you? Sitting on your pile of money, acting like you're better than the rest of us. I stared him down. I don't think I'm better than anyone. But I do know I'm not a desperate coward who tries to solve his problems by running people over. Mark's lips curled into a sneer. "Watch your back," he muttered. And then, just like that, he turned, climbed back into his car, and sped off down the road. I stood there, my body still tense, my mind racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mark had just proven how far he was willing to go. And that meant I had to be ready for whatever came next. The sterile white walls of the hospital room blurred as I blinked against the bright overhead lights. My body ached from the impact, though I was lucky to have only suffered bruises and minor scrapes. The doctors had insisted on keeping me overnight for observation, but I knew the real reason. I had just survived an attempted vehicular assault, and they wanted to make sure I was in one piece before I left. I should have been furious. I should have been plotting my next move, figuring out how to deal with Mark. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness settled in my chest, and I let my head rest against the stiff pillow, trying to gather my thoughts. That was when I heard the door creak open. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The sound of her heels clicking against the tile floor was enough. "Fiona." I exhaled slowly, opening my eyes as she stepped into the room. She looked different, hollow almost. Her usual sharp confidence was gone, replaced with something darker. She had always carried herself like she was untouchable, like the world owed her something. But now, she looked like someone who had realized, too late, that she had nothing left. She came to a stop at the foot of my bed, her arms crossed over her chest. "You're tougher than I thought," she muttered, her voice devoid of emotion. I stared at her, unamused. "I'll take that as a compliment." She scoffed, shaking her head. "I can't believe this. Mark is a damn idiot." I raised an eyebrow. "That's what you're leading with? Not an apology?" She ignored the jab. "Do you have any idea what kind of mess this is? He could have killed you." I leaned forward slightly, wincing at the ache in my ribs. "Yeah, Fiona." I noticed. She rubbed her temples, as if this entire situation was some sort of inconvenience to her rather than a potential murder attempt. "You think I told him to do this? You think I wanted this?" I studied her, searching for sincerity. "I don't know what you want anymore." Her jaw tightened. "I want what I deserve." I let out a bitter laugh. "There it is." She took a step closer, her expression darkening. "Don't act like you're some saint, like you're just sitting on that money without a second thought. You don't even need it." I met her gaze, my patience running thin. Whether I need it or not isn't the point. Mom made her choice. And, frankly, after the way you've acted, I think she made the right one. Her nostrils flared. "You're just like her." I tilted my head. "Funny. I thought that was supposed to be an insult." She exhaled sharply, pacing the length of the room like a caged animal. "You don't get it. You never had to fight for anything. Everything was just handed to you." I frowned. "Is that really what you think?" She turned on me, her eyes flashing. "Yes. You always had Mom's favor, Dad's respect. And me? I had to fight for everything. And now, after all these years, after everything, you get to walk away with all of it, and I get nothing." I sighed, shaking my head. "That's not my fault, Fiona. You had chances, so many chances, to prove you could handle responsibility. Mom bailed you out of your debts. She tried to help you set up a future, and you threw it all away." Her face twisted with frustration. "That's easy for you to say. You've never struggled a day in your life." I narrowed my eyes. "You have no idea what I've been through." She let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please. What hardships could you possibly know?" I stared at her for a long moment before shaking my head. "That's the problem, Fiona. You don't see anything beyond yourself." She flinched, but quickly masked it with a scowl. "You really won't give me anything?" I exhaled slowly. "No." Her hands curled into fists. "Not even half?" "No." "A quarter?" "No." Her breathing became uneven, her nails digging into her palms. "You selfish bastard." I remained calm. "That's rich, coming from you." She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "You don't get it. You're all I have left." For a moment, I saw something raw in her expression, something that almost resembled desperation. But I had learned the hard way that Fiona's emotions were always tied to something she wanted. I didn't flinch. "You should have thought about that before you let your greed destroy everything." She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Then, just as quickly as the vulnerability had appeared, it was gone. She straightened, her mask of defiance returning. "I hope you enjoy your money," she spat. "Because one day, you're going to wake up and realize you have no one left." I held her gaze. "I'd rather have no one than have people who only see me as a bank account." Her face twisted in fury, but she didn't argue. She simply turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Fiona had just confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't over. The house felt hollow when I stepped inside, the kind of emptiness that settled deep in the bones. My mother's home, my home now, had always been full of warmth when she was alive. The scent of fresh-baked bread, the quiet hum of classical music playing from the old record player, the faint echoes of childhood memories woven into the walls. Now, it was silent. I walked through the grand foyer, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Dust had begun to settle in the corners, a reminder that I hadn't been here enough since she passed. I had been avoiding it, letting grief hold me at arm's length. But now, something else pulled me back. A nagging feeling, a gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. After Fiona's visit at the hospital, I knew she wouldn't just give up. She had been desperate, yes, but she had also been angry. And anger, when mixed with desperation, was a dangerous thing. I made my way toward the living room, but something caught my eye as I passed by the hallway leading to my mother's study. The door was slightly ajar. I frowned. I distinctly remembered locking it the last time I was here. A cold sensation crawled up my spine as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My mother's desk was usually pristine, every paper neatly stacked, every book perfectly aligned. Not this time. The drawers had been emptied, papers scattered across the floor. The bookshelves were in disarray, some books missing entirely. The safe in the corner, previously hidden behind a painting, was left slightly open, its contents gone. My chest tightened. Fiona. I didn't need proof. I knew it was her. She was the only one desperate enough, reckless enough to do something like this. I moved through the room carefully, sifting through the mess she had left behind. Important documents were missing, bank statements, deeds, even small valuables that my mother had kept locked away. The fact that she had managed to get inside meant only one thing. She had been planning this for a while. A sharp knock at the front door made me turn. I walked back through the house, my pulse quickening. When I opened the door, the lawyer stood there, his usual composed expression replaced with something more serious. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. I exhaled. "Let me guess, Fiona?" He nodded. "She's been selling off items from your mother's estate." I clenched my jaw. "What?" "She's already moved a few valuable pieces, antiques, jewelry, even stocks that weren't legally hers to touch. She's draining accounts that belonged to your mother before they could be fully transferred." I rubbed a hand over my face. "Of course she is." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "We need to take legal action immediately. If we don't, she'll take everything she can and disappear before we can stop her." I knew he was right. Fiona had no claim to anything, but that wouldn't stop her from trying. She had spent her entire life taking what she wanted, using manipulation and deceit to carve out a space for herself in a world that had never truly been hers. And now, she was proving just how far she was willing to go. "Do whatever you need to," I said firmly. "Freeze the accounts. Contact the authorities. If she wants to play this game, she's going to lose." The lawyer nodded. "I'll handle it." As he left, I turned back toward the house, my hands tightening into fists. Fiona had crossed a line, and this time, there was no coming back from it. The next morning, I found myself sitting in the lawyer's office, my hands clasped together as he shuffled through a thick stack of documents. The room smelled like old leather and paper, the scent of years of legal battles and quiet victories. I had barely slept the night before, my mind running through all the ways Fiona had betrayed me, betrayed our mother's memory. "She really emptied the house?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The lawyer nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Not just the house. She accessed accounts that were still in transition, sold off valuables, and even took out loans using the estate as collateral." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "She's been busy." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "And there's no way to undo the damage? We've already frozen the accounts we could, but some of the money is gone. The assets she sold, we might be able to recover some of them, but it won't be easy." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And there's something else." I braced myself. "What now?" "She's demanding a final review of the will." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Of course she is. She insists she's entitled to something." "She's entitled to nothing," I said flatly. The lawyer nodded. "I agree. But she's not going to stop until she's forced to." He tapped the papers in front of him. "We can take legal action now. File for fraud, theft, even misrepresentation. If we move quickly, we can stop her before she does more damage." I nodded, my decision already made. do it." The lawyer sighed, picking up his pen. "You're making the right call." But even as he started the paperwork, I knew this wasn't just about legal battles anymore. Fiona wouldn't go down quietly, and I wasn't ready to let her walk away unscathed. A week later, I arrived at the courthouse for the final review of the will. Fiona was already there, sitting at the long wooden table across from me, her face a mask of barely concealed rage. She was dressed in black, as if mourning something she had lost, though I doubted it was our mother. Mark was nowhere to be seen. She didn't acknowledge me as I sat down. The lawyer cleared his throat, placing the final will in front of him. "This review has been granted as a formality, but I will reiterate that the document is legally binding." Fiona folded her arms. "We'll see about that." The lawyer ignored her, flipping through the pages. "The estate, the financial holdings, and all remaining assets are to be passed to the sole heir, as designated by the deceased. No amendments or changes have been made." Fiona scoffed. "That's a lie. There has to be something in there for me." "There isn't." She gritted her teeth. Then she was coerced. I sighed. "You're really going to claim that Mom, the woman who loved you like her own, was coerced into making a decision you don't like?" Fiona's eyes flashed. "You poisoned her against me." I shook my head. "No, Fiona. You did that all on your own." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "This document is legally sound. You have no claim to the inheritance." Fiona's hands trembled. "That's not fair." The lawyer leaned forward. "You already took more than your share, illegally." Silence. Then, before I could fully process what was happening, Fiona's expression shifted, fear flickering across her face before she masked it with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about." The lawyer slid another document across the table. "Actually, I do. We have records of the funds you took, the assets you sold, and the fraudulent loans you secured." Fiona's face turned pale. "We can pursue charges," the lawyer continued, his voice calm but firm. "And we will." Panic crept into Fiona's expression. "You can't prove anything." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Actually, we can." Her eyes darted to the device as I pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room. "She said we were rich. She told me we'd have millions. That's why I married her." Fiona's entire body stiffened. The recording continued, Mark's voice growing more desperate. "She lied. She played me. And now I find out she's been selling off things that don't even belong to her." Fiona shot to her feet. "You set me up." I tilted my head. "I didn't have to. Mark did that all on his own." The lawyer folded his hands together. "We'll be filing for fraud charges against both you and your husband." Fiona's breathing turned uneven. "You can't do this." I leaned forward. "I already have." She stared at me, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. Then, without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room. I watched her go, exhaling slowly. It was over. And this time, she had nothing left to take. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but the tension inside was suffocating. I sat at the front, hands folded, as the proceedings unfolded. Mark sat slumped beside his lawyer, his usual arrogance gone. His suit, once perfectly tailored, now hung loosely on him, as if he had lost weight from the stress of it all. He didn't look at Fiona. He hadn't since they walked in. Fiona, on the other hand, looked like she had been fighting a war she never expected to lose. She had traded her designer dresses for something more conservative, her hair pulled back tightly, as if she was trying to regain control of a life that had slipped through her fingers. But there was no hiding from the truth now. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge tapped his gavel, signaling the next phase of the trial. The prosecutor stood, flipping through his notes. "The defendants, Mark and Fiona Whitmore, are charged with fraud, theft, and misrepresentation. The evidence provided includes bank records, transaction logs, and recorded statements implicating both individuals in the illegal sale of estate assets." Fiona flinched at the mention of the recordings. I sat still, watching her. She had always been good at playing the victim, but today, that tactic wouldn't save her. The prosecutor continued, his tone measured. "The plaintiff, the rightful heir to the estate, has provided irrefutable proof that Mrs. Whitmore systematically drained accounts, sold valuables that did not belong to her, and attempted to obtain fraudulent loans against estate assets." The judge turned his gaze toward Fiona's lawyer. "Does the defense have anything to present?" Her lawyer, a man who looked like he had been regretting taking this case since day one, stood awkwardly. "Your Honor, my client was under the impression that she had a rightful claim to these assets." There was no intentional fraud, simply a misunderstanding regarding her place in the estate. The judge raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? Fiona's lawyer cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. She believed she had a valid stake. The prosecutor smirked, flipping a page in his folder. Then why did she move funds out of accounts before the will was even contested? Why did she sell valuables in secrecy? Why did she take out loans under false pretenses? Fiona shifted uncomfortably. The judge exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything to say for yourself? Fiona opened her mouth, then hesitated. This was it. The moment she had to decide whether to fight or accept her fate. Her gaze flickered to me, just for a second. There was something there, a flash of desperation, a silent plea. But I felt nothing. No pity, no regret. She had made her choices. And now, she had to face the consequences. She started, voice shaky. Then, in a move so unlike her, she dropped her head. I have nothing to say. Mark turned to her, his face contorted in disbelief. You're just going to roll over? She didn't respond. He scoffed, shaking his head. Unbelievable. The judge nodded. Very well. Given the overwhelming evidence, I have no choice but to move forward with sentencing. Mr. Whitmore, based on your direct involvement in financial fraud and the illegal sale of assets, you will serve a prison sentence of 3 years, with the possibility of parole after 1 year. Mark's face paled. What? The judge ignored him, turning to Fiona. Mrs. Whitmore, your actions, while unethical, were not as directly tied to the financial fraud, given that many of the transactions were executed by your husband. However, your participation in unauthorized withdrawals and illegal sales warrants legal consequences. You will be required to repay the stolen funds and serve a probation period of 2 years. Any failure to meet these terms will result in further sentencing. Fiona's lips parted, her breath hitching. You mean? I'm not going to prison. The judge's gaze hardened. That depends entirely on you. She nodded quickly, her hands shaking. Mark, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode. You can't do this. She's the one who dragged me into this mess. The judge wasn't moved. Regardless of how it began, you made your own decisions, Mr. Whitmore. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck the wood, and just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps, watching as people scattered. The weight on my shoulders had finally lifted, but it was a hollow victory. Fiona walked out moments later, stopping a few feet away from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. You won. I studied her. It was never about winning. She scoffed. Isn't it? You got the money. The house. And now, I have nothing. I tilted my head. No, Fiona. You did that to yourself. She looked away, something unreadable in her expression. I thought Mark would stay, she admitted, her voice quieter now. I thought he'd fight for me. I let out a breath. Mark was only ever fighting for himself. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to hold back tears. When she opened them, she looked tired. More tired than I had ever seen her. I don't know what to do now, she murmured. For the first time in a long time, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But sympathy wasn't the same as forgiveness. I guess you'll have to figure that out, I said simply. She nodded, not looking at me. Yeah, I guess I will. And with that, she walked away. I watched until she disappeared into the crowd. Maybe this was the end. Or maybe Fiona would find a way back into my life someday. But for now, at least, justice had been served. The morning air was crisp as I stepped out onto the porch of my mother's house. No, my house now. The autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed it in without the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my chest. The past months had been a storm, but now, it was finally over. Fiona was gone. Not in the dramatic sense, she hadn't skipped town, nor had she completely vanished from existence. But after the trial, she had disappeared from my life. No more phone calls, no more threats, no more desperate demands for what she believed was hers. She had walked away from the courthouse that day without looking back. And I let her go. The truth was, I had expected some grand final attempt from her, a last-ditch effort to manipulate, to claw back some fragment of the life she had lost. But it never came. Whether she had finally accepted reality or was simply biding her time, I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care anymore. The sound of laughter drifted from inside the house, breaking me from my thoughts. I turned to see my wife standing in the doorway, one of our kids tugging at her sleeve, excitedly chattering about something I couldn't quite make out. This This was what mattered. Not the money, not the house, not the drama Fiona and Mark had dragged me into. My family, my life. I smiled at them, stepping inside and shutting the door behind me. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself sitting in my mother's old study, the same room Fiona had ransacked in her final act of desperation. It had taken me weeks to sort through the mess she had left behind, but now, everything was in order again. The bookshelves were full, the desk was clear, and the safe, now relocated, was locked tight. I reached for the leather-bound journal sitting on the desk. My mother's handwriting covered the pages, her thoughts and memories frozen in ink. I had hesitated to read it at first, unsure if I was ready to face the words she had left behind. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wanted to hear her voice again. As I flipped through the pages, one entry caught my eye. I worry about Fiona. I always have. She's so desperate to prove herself, to be seen as more than she is. But I fear that in chasing something that was never meant to be hers, she'll lose sight of what she already has. I hope she finds peace someday. I hope she learns that love and acceptance can't be taken, only given. I closed the journal, exhaling slowly. Maybe Mom had seen this coming. Maybe she had known, deep down, that Fiona would never change. But I wasn't going to let her ghost haunt me anymore. A few days later, I received a letter. It wasn't from Fiona, but it was about her. The lawyer had sent an update. Fiona had begun repaying her debts. Slowly, but surely. She was holding up her end of the legal agreement, staying out of trouble, trying, at least on paper, to rebuild her life. I stared at the letter for a long time, unsure of how to feel. She hadn't reached out. She hadn't tried to apologize. And maybe that was for the best. I set the letter down and turned my attention back to my family. Because in the end, Fiona had made her choices. And so had I. Justice had prevailed. Greed had lost. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was truly free.